Hello and welcome to the latest in our series of webcasts with key figures in the debate on the 2014 Scottish independence referendum. In the hot seat today is Blair McDougall, head of Better Together, which is the official campaign to keep the union. You've been sending in your questions all week for Mr McDougall, and now he's got time to answer them. Good afternoon, Mr McDougall, first of all. Let's get on to the questions that have been sent into us via the BBC Scotland News website. Let's start with an issue which has been rumbling throughout the independence debate for the last few months, which is the European Union. P. Kelly from Elgin has sent in, why will the British government not enter into contingency discussions with the Scottish government over the practical arrangements if the referendum leads to independence? This is a question which Alexander is also asking now.
Well, I think that the job of the UK government is to run the UK in the interests of the whole UK and in the interests of Scotland. We will either vote to stay in the United Kingdom or to leave the United Kingdom, and the right time to be talking about how we then unstitch and separate the United Kingdom will be if Scots vote for that. I think in the meantime it's for the nationalists to set out what their proposals are. In the meantime, I think it's right that the UK government gets on with their job.
Is that a responsible attitude, do you think? Because we know they must certainly entertain the view that there could be a yes vote in 2014, therefore wouldn't it be responsible for the government to have discussions about that scenario? I mean, that's sensible, isn't it? That's common sense.
There'll be a period after any vote, if there is a yes vote, between that vote and independence. I think that up until that point, it's right that the governments, both governments actually, focus on getting on with the job that they're elected to do. And I think that we'll have this big debate, both sides will set out their decision, but I think it's premature before anyone's actually cast a vote to be entering into negotiations about how to separate Scotland from the rest of the UK.
Now, this is something that the Electoral Commission, when they issued their report into the referendum process earlier on this week, said, they said actually the two sides, for the sake of voters, should get together and agree a position of what will happen if there's a yes vote, what will happen if there's a no vote. You seem to be rejecting that advice from the Electoral Commission.
I don't think at all. I think both the UK government and ourselves have said that what the UK Electoral Commission said was a fairly straightforward thing, which was some simple, practical, procedural information for people about what would happen in the event of either a yes vote or a no vote. And actually, the Electoral Commission, when questioned on this, said that they weren't actually asking for pre-negotiations, they were just asking for some really simple practical information.
Like what?
Like the fact that if people stay, I guess, within the United Kingdom, there'll be another general election, that if they decide to leave the United Kingdom, that negotiations will begin for independence. But look, that practical simple information, which is the kind of thing that the Electoral Commission said was what they were looking for, isn't for me to write or for Yes Scotland to write, it's for the two governments to talk about. But to be clear,
do you think that's all the detail the Electoral Commission were talking about then?
I think that's what Mr McCormick, the Commissioner, suggested when he was interviewed. It's not detailed policy information in terms of the, as I say, pre-negotiations for what might happen. It's just simple practical information so that voters can make a clear decision.
Now, one of the key questions has been the status of independent Scotland in the European Union. William has sent us this question. Why has the Westminster government still not asked the EU for advice? It's also something that Charles has picked up on, Garth Scott Lodge has picked up on as well. I mean, we know the situation, which is the European Commission has said quite clearly if a member state, i.e. the UK government, asks us for the status of independent Scotland in the EU, we will answer that specific question. Why haven't they done that?
Well, I think that's just another way of skinning the same cat for the nationalist side. You know, the UK government shouldn't enter into negotiations until the people of Scotland have voted to leave the United Kingdom. We're some way, thankfully, away from that situation at the moment. But look, it's not a mystery what the European Commission's position is. Mr Burrowes has said in countless television interviews, he's been backed up by many other European figures, including in your interview with the Irish Foreign Minister recently, that a new state, and Scotland would be a new state, would have to go through an application process. Now, I don't think it's in any way unclear what the position of the European Commission is.
But you can be 100% clear by giving them a specific scenario, which the Scottish Government would like the UK Government to do now, which is saying to President Burrowes, so here's a specific scenario, give us your definite legal advice, and then that would clear up the debate, wouldn't it?
Well, President Burrowes has been really clear. If there is a new state, and he was asked in the context of Scotland, so he was clear about what he was saying, if there is a new state, that new state has to submit a new application for EU membership. Now, he has said that so many times that I've almost lost count of him saying that. That's been backed up by the President of the Council as well. People have consistently said across Europe that if Scotland's a new state, it will have to negotiate. I don't think there's any doubt in that. Now, I think the onus is actually on the Scottish Government to set out what their negotiation strategy is. So we've not heard from them so far whether they acknowledge that they would have to negotiate an opt-out on the single European currency, something which all new EU states have to sign up to. We've not heard whether they accept that they would need an opt-out on the Schengen Agreement on open borders, which raises the possibility of border controls within the United Kingdom. And we've not heard what their strategy is for retaining the rebate worth £135 to every Scottish family. Something that the Scot who actually negotiated the UK's membership of the EU in the first place, Lord Kerr, last week wrote was something that they didn't have a hope in hell of getting in a negotiation.
And wouldn't it be important for voters, because remember they're the most important people in this particular campaign, wouldn't it be important for them to get the actual clear views of the European Commission on all of these subjects of what would happen in independent Scotland? And the only way to achieve that is for the UK government to put a specific scenario. I mean, surely you as a campaigner, it would be very helpful to you if you believe that Mr Burrowes' view is clear, that you could say with absolute certainty this is what the European Commission say.
Well, I don't accept that there's any doubt over what the European Commission is saying. I think that if you're a drowning man, you cling for anything. And I think that the nationalists have, understandably been under the cosh on Europe since they were found to be sort of not telling the truth in terms of their own legal advice on this. And again, I would say, look, the European Commission has set out what their view is. The UK government has set out their view. It was 3 months since we were promised that the Scottish Government had finally commissioned the legal advice that they pretended they had. I think it's time that we heard something from them in terms of what their negotiation strategy is for getting through what would be an incredibly fast-track negotiation to try to maintain all the things that we currently enjoy as part of a strong, influential country within the United Kingdom.
Let's move on, if we can. There's a question here from Alistair which says, as much as I have read and listened to regarding the vote next year, what majority must the SNP gain to go ahead with independence? Surely 51% does not allow this, says Alistair. All that will do is split the country. What's your view on that?
Well, we campaign very hard for fair referendum rules, and we campaign for fair referendum rules because in the event of a close vote, like they had in Quebec in the 1990s, it was really important that everybody had absolute confidence in the process. We thought it was a big victory for our campaign that we finally got the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, to agree to those rules, and I think it is really important that this whole process is run in a way that makes sure that if in the event of a marginal result that both sides have confidence. Now, what I would say is I don't think we envisage there being a particularly close result. We are campaigning hard to make sure...
What result do you envisage
we are confident of winning a strong victory. We're not taking people for granted. We're not being complacent. I won't give a percentage because we are eternal warriors against complacency and better together. But we're not planning for a close result. The way you plan for a close result is by having rules that everyone can have confidence in. We took a step forward and we had, I think, a major victory on that this week. But we have to continue to watch and make sure that this entire contest is run in a way that nobody can doubt the probity of the result.
But in terms of clarity, whichever side gets one more vote than the other will have won, as far as you're concerned.
Well, I don't think anyone wants to see a scenario like that. But this will be a democratic vote, and clearly, 50+1 votes is enough. But I think for people on my side of the argument and our side of the argument, the vast majority of Scots who wish to stay in the United Kingdom, the challenge is to make sure that they get out and vote. If there's any complacency creeps into this, if we have a low turnout and there's some, any sense of there being complacency going into the vote, then you do risk a situation where you have a close vote. If people believe in the United Kingdom, if they believe that Scotland is stronger than the United Kingdom, they need to go out and vote for that in 2014. And we'll be working very hard, not just to convince people, but to get people out to vote on the day of the referendum. We've
had quite a few questions in on the issue of the benefits of independence, benefits of staying within the Union. Fiona has sent us quite a lengthy question, but it's very interesting. What benefit is there to me as an unpaid carer, she says, with disabled children staying tethered in a union which is led by a coalition which is hell-bent on ostracising people with disabilities? Fiona continues, my children, if we stay in the union, face an uncertain future where they'll have to fight to get support and services to allow them to be part of society. My children didn't ask to have special needs, but what we see coming from Westminster is a sustained attack on the poor and the disabled and the vulnerable. I do not think an independent Scotland of any political hue would be so cruel, says Fiona.
Well, look, I grew up in a family in I guess similar circumstances, a family on benefits. My mother was disabled. If I thought for one moment that independence was the answer to the kind of poverty and disadvantage that's described in that question, I wouldn't be campaigning for Better Together. I'd be off campaigning for Yes Scotland. But I don't think it is. And what I find sort of personally distasteful about the way that benefits is spoken about is that the misery that people do face in low incomes, particularly at the moment, is just used as another political tool. Another wedge to drive between us and people in the rest of the United Kingdom. It isn't a policy debate for the Nationalists. If it was a policy debate for the Nationalists, they would have set out what the benefit system would look like in an independent Scotland. We don't know how the benefits would be paid, we don't know what they would be, and we don't know at what level they would be paid.
What we do know is that the vast majority of voters in Scotland didn't endorse the Conservatives at the last general election, and yet they have a coalition government which is making very significant decisions affecting tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives here in Scotland. Well, they're governed by a party they didn't vote for.
Well, there's a debate to be had on policy on benefits, and my point was that that should be a debate on policy, and it shouldn't be used as another way to try to divide people in Scotland from their friends and family in the rest of the UK. But there's also that other argument that the Nationalists make about this being about the government in Westminster. Governments come and go. Governments last for 5 years and then sometimes are kicked out. Independence would be forever. And the argument that the Nationalists make about an independent Scotland doesn't rest on the colour of government that there was in Westminster. When there was the longest period of sustained Labour government in our history, 13 years of Labour government, all the way through that they argued for independence too. As I say, I don't think this is a debate about democracy. I don't think for them it's a debate about the policy of welfare reform. It's about what they've always argued for, which is separating us from our friends and family in the rest of the United Kingdom.
Do you not think though that an independent Scotland, given the way most voters in Scotland vote, would be more socially just, would have a different set of priorities to those of the Conservative government?
Well, I think we have substantial devolution over issues like health and education at the moment. But my question about that is, what sort of vision for an independent Scotland are we actually being asked? So for years we've had Jim Mather going around telling people that it will be a low tax economy, that will be cutting corporation tax. Blair Jenkins, who sat in this chair in the last interview, has been going around telling people that we'd be paying 57% tax like in Norway. Now, we need to choose which vision of an independent Scotland we're actually being offered here, and it's deeply unclear. So people will argue from a left-wing perspective, some people will argue from a right-wing perspective, but I think for the Nationalists, and particularly for the SNP, it's time they chose what vision they're actually putting forward to us.
Doug has sent us this question. Will Blair tell us what the positive case for the union is without trying to tell us that it's a big bad world like Alistair Darling always does?
Well, our argument is pretty clear. We think we get the best of both worlds at the moment. You get the strength and opportunities and shared risk of the United Kingdom with a distinctive Scottish Parliament with powers over things, total powers over things like health and education. We think that on the economy we're better together because we sell twice as much to the rest of the United Kingdom as we do to the rest of the world. We think that for social reasons we're better together. If you or I, God forbid, have some sort of rare illness, we can go to any NHS hospital in the whole of the United Kingdom and be treated. Equally, if you fall down the stairs in Euston Station, you go to St Thomas's Hospital, you get treated without being charged. There are things that bind us together in this country.
If I was French, I'd get treated without being charged as well, wouldn't
Not in the same way that you would in the NHS, and particularly not if you didn't have your E1 form in your back pocket. But all these things bind us together, and 300 years of shared history and shared family history. We have 800,000 Scots working and living in the rest of the United Kingdom, taking advantage of the opportunities there. We have 500,000 English people, I think, living within Scotland.
But if an independent Scotland and the rest of the UK were both in the European Union, they could live and work wherever they wanted to, couldn't they? I mean,
well, I think
that would continue to be the case.
Take the economic argument, for example. If you ask any small business person whether it's as easy to trade with countries in the European Union like Germany or France as it is to trade with our home market the rest of the United Kingdom, they would tell you that actually it's quite a different affair trading with the EU, even within the single market of the European Union. An argument's sort of fairly simple. When you have such an important home market, when you have so many jobs dependent on the Union of the United Kingdom, why would you even risk making it more difficult to trade?
Josh has written into us, do you still stick by your claim that Westminster subsidised Scotland to the tune of £1,200, conveniently failing to recognise that independent Scotland's GDP would include around 90% of current UK oil receipts? Or do you agree with the STUC when they say that the £1,200 deficit figure is flawed and the Better Together campaign should not be using it? That's from Josh.
Well, I think it's important to say that £1,200 figure was not something that we thought up or something which the UK government had thought up. It was independent analysis by the respected Institute for Fiscal Studies. So this wasn't our figure. But look, there'll be a lot of he said, she said on this, and I think people sometimes get a little bit fed up with this. But one of the good things about the length of time we've got to debate this is that we can have a proper debate about the finances of an independent Scotland and how that relates to being within the United Kingdom and what the benefits
Do you think Scotland can afford independence?
We've never argued that Scotland couldn't be independent. The question is always, would we be better or worse off inside or outside? And for the reasons I've given, you know, the number of jobs that rely on access to the single UK market, on being able to trade freely with each other, but also on the wider stability that being part of the United Kingdom gives us at a time of international financial turbulence, we would argue that financially we'd be better off. But of course, it's not the only argument for staying together.
Alex Salmond, this is a question from Craig from South Ireland. So Alex Salmond recently asked people to imagine what Scotland was already independent and instead voting to join into the Union. If this was the case, what would your most compelling argument for joining the Union be?
Well, I think we're being asked to go into a polling booth and not the TARDIS. They often come up with this argument, and I just don't quite understand it. Look, 300 years ago, when the Union was being considered, it was Scots who were strongly arguing for it as an idea. The historian Colin Kidd, I think, quite convincingly argues that actually the Union was a Scottish invention. So look at things now. If we had such close family and friendship ties as we do within the United Kingdom, would we choose to go into the Union now? Of course we would. If so many jobs relied on trade and the shared economic risk and opportunity that we enjoy across the United Kingdom, would we have gone into the Union? I think we would. I think that it's a nonsensical argument to try to base the case for Scotland.
So are the people of Ireland suddenly wanting to send MPs to Westminster then? There are lots of trading links, there are lots of family links, and yet they're not knocking at the door to join into the Union, are they?
Well, I don't think that Ireland's position within the Union historically was particularly similar to Scotland's position within the United Kingdom. But look, I think the vast majority of people in Scotland recognise that there is a sort of false choice being put before them, that somehow it's between rule from Westminster and rule in Scotland, or somehow it's between feeling Scottish and feeling British. Our argument is you can have the best of both worlds. You can have the strong Scottish Parliament with total powers over things like health and education, and you can have the strength and security and shared risk of being part of the United Kingdom.
We have a question here from Stuart. The No campaign has relentlessly harped on about the uncertainty of an independent Scotland, so what can Blair say with certainty about Scotland staying in the Union? Can he guarantee that we will stay in the EU? Can he guarantee that Tories will not win the 2015 general election? You can't guarantee any of that stuff, can you?
But the important thing to note here is that governments come and go. A decision to leave the United Kingdom will be forever. There'll be no going back from that decision. So we need to make sure that we make the right decision. And that's why it's so important that the Nationalists do provide certainty for their case. They only have to win this once. You can't kick them out after 5 years. Once we've made this decision to leave the United Kingdom, that's it forever. But on the question of the EU, look, all three parties within Better Together are agreed that we should stay within the United Kingdom. There's a debate about what the best way to do that is, but there's one thing that's absolutely certain, that if the Nationalists get a yes vote, Scotland will be leaving the UK, and so will be leaving the European Union. And I think that all the arguments that are there, and they're strong arguments for why Scotland and the United Kingdom are both better off within the European Union, are also arguments for staying within the United Kingdom. We're better when we work together. Did
David Cameron's speech offering an in-out referendum, that help your campaign?
I don't think it. I think what was interesting about the response to it was that Alex Salmond immediately claimed that it was a game-changing moment in the debate. I think if it was a game-changing moment, it was a bit of an own goal, because immediately all their arguments for leaving the United Kingdom, which I think are very similar to UKIP's arguments for leaving the European Union, were exposed for what they were. They didn't make sense. So when Nicola Sturgeon went to give her speech in Dublin, she claimed that our biggest international, our biggest trading partner is Scotland, was the European Union. It's not true. Scotland sells 4 times as much to the rest of the United Kingdom as it does to the European Union. So if it's important for Scotland to stay within the European Union for economic reasons, it's 4 times as important for Scotland to stay within the United Kingdom Union.
Let's go on to another issue. Stuart has sent us this question. Considering that parties in the anti-independence campaign struggle to agree on further devolution in the event of a no vote, and there may be a referendum on the EU in 4 to 5 years' time, why should Scotland vote no? Well,
all 3 parties within Better Together are in the process of setting out what they think on further devolution. Liberal Democrats have already set out substantial proposals. The Labour Party have said that they will have an interim report from their own devolution commission coming up in a couple of months. And I think last week Ruth Davidson gave a speech that, 10 years ago I don't think anyone would have thought that a Conservative leader in Scotland would give, where she embraced wholeheartedly further devolution. But I think the point here is that people understand the difference between an irreversible decision to leave the United Kingdom and separate from our nearest neighbour, and a decision on further devolution. Further devolution involves back and forth within the United Kingdom. Independence means leaving the United Kingdom. And I think that people understand that. But ultimately, I think people should judge us by our actions on this. I remember as a Labour Party activist in 1987 listening to Alex Salmond saying that he would no more trust Labour to deliver a Scottish Parliament than to deliver a pizza. Well, I'm not sure what job Alex Salmond does now, but I'm fairly sure we have a Scottish Parliament. I'm fairly sure that when Labour extended the powers to that Scottish Parliament, that Alex Salmond opposed it. I think people are clear that the choice is between the risk and uncertainty of independence and positive change and continuing change with devolution within the United Kingdom.
Sam has sent this question. Will the Better Together campaign tell us precisely what, if any, powers Scotland would get in the event of a no vote? Because I wouldn't vote no unless there is a 100% guarantee that Scotland would get more powers over welfare spending and economic powers over our natural resources, as well as removing Trident from the Clyde. These seem to be the most important issues over the independence debate. Will there be a firm blueprint from either the 3 parties which you represent individually or collectively, so that Scots do know what will happen if they do vote no?
Well, I think the simple answer to that is yes. All 3 parties have said, and I don't think it's a big surprise that they said it, that long in advance of the independence vote, people will be able to look at their proposals for the future of devolution.
So we'll have a clear blueprint which tells us what further powers they would like to see devolved to Edinburgh in enough time ahead of the 2014 referendum so that people can decide what to do.
Well, it won't be a single blueprint. The 3 parties will put their case forward, and people will be able to make a judgment on that.
Should Scotland have further devolution in your view, asks Zach Campbell?
I would like to see personally more devolution from Holyrood to local communities and from Westminster to local communities. I don't think this should just be a debate about how much power our First Minister has. But I think on a personal level, like most Scots, I'm looking at the debate and watching the debate and with interest in terms of the future of devolution. I mean, last week I thought we had a very interesting contribution from the IPPR, one of the more substantial and significant proposals for the future of devolution that we've had. I thought it was a pity that the Nationalists dismissed it out of hand without even reading it. But like most Scots, I'll watch this debate and decide what form of devolution I want towards the end of it.
On the similar theme, Ewan asks, can Blair tell us what a no vote stands for? Does it mean that the devolved settlement is fixed, with Westminster being the ultimate controller of the purse strings? Or what powers a no vote will see further devolved, particularly in the fields of revenue raising and expenditure? If a no vote does not fix the devolved settlement, at what point will another referendum be called? I mean, you've talked about the fact you believe in a different kind of devolution, perhaps. I mean, do you think that Holyrood does need some further economic powers in those proposals?
Well, in answer to the question that was put, all of the proposals from the 3 parties will be put in front of people far in advance of the referendum, and they can make a judgment on that. I would say again, judge the pro-devolution parties by their actions. When the Scottish Constitutional Convention was going through, which established devolution in the first place. The Nationalists stood outside it and demanded independence. When Labour established the Calman Commission, which has delivered significant additional tax-raising powers for Scotland, powers that are now being transferred to Scotland, something that I think most viewers may not know, the Nationalists opposed it. When that fresh devolution proposal was put forward by respected think tank IPPR last week, they opposed it. So, you know, I think judge people by their actions. We have a record of bringing forward devolution proposals and delivering on them, and I think that people will see our proposals from those three parties before the referendum and they'll be able to make a judgment.
Alan says, I wonder if you could give me 3 examples of how Scotland will be better after a no vote. Please note, not 3 examples of how we wouldn't be worse off, but 3 definitive examples of how Scottish society will be improved by staying in the Union.
Well, I think that one of the great things about being in the Union is that it enables us to better take advantage of our natural and our human resources. So this week on Better Together's Facebook page, we have launched a campaign talking about how the disproportionate levels and fantastic levels of research funding that Scotland receives from the UK helps ensure that we have scientific excellence, that our inventors are coming up with new medicines, new inventions, new ideas, but also that keeps our universities better. That will continue into the future and continue to make sure that we lead the world on that. I think that you can make a similar case in terms of the investment we get in green energy, where we receive about 1/3 of Britain's green energy subsidy. We pay only for about 1/10 of that. I think you can also make the case in oil, where we'll be better equipped to squeeze every last drop of oil out of the North Sea if we're part of the United Kingdom and able to share the risk and the cost of decommissioning.
Now, we're running out of time, so let's run through a few other topics that we can do. John asks, why is the Yes campaign running such a negative campaign? Peter also asks something similar as well. There's no positive case from the Union most of the time that we hear those who don't want Scotland to be independent. Similar theme from Scott Watson as well. I mean, it is a particularly negative campaign from the Better Together.
Well, I don't accept that at all. If you look at our campaigning materials, if you look at what we're out doing on the doorstep day after day, we're talking about almost nothing other than the positive case for staying within the United Kingdom. But the people who tend to say that we're negative are the nationalists who don't want us to ask questions. They don't want us to ask questions because they haven't thought through their own proposals for independence. And it isn't just Better Together who are being told to sort of, you know, shut up and stop asking questions. When the former head of the Royal Navy questioned what the impact of independence would be on defence jobs in Scotland, he was called a scaremonger. When one of the leading Edinburgh pensions advisors questioned what the impact would be on private pensions in Scotland, he was called a scaremonger. Even when Emmanuel Barroso, the President of the European Union, expresses an opinion on Europe, he's accused of scaremongering. And I think that one of the reasons the Nationalist campaign is in such difficulty is that people see the Nationalists telling them to shut up and stop asking questions, and they rightly assume that what that means is that they don't have answers to those questions in the first place.
On the issue of identity, I'd like to ask what role you think identity has in the independence debate. Do you think how we see ourselves will shape our future, asks Jamie. And Tom asks, do you feel Scottish or British?
I feel Scottish first, I feel British second. I have English and Welsh blood in me. I feel very much a kind of product of the United Kingdom. What role will it play? I think that one of the interesting things that we've seen over the last 6 months is how content Scots are to feel, yes, fiercely and proudly Scottish, but also to have a sense of Britishness and to understand that that's not a choice that they have to make between the two of them. I think identity will be there. I think the Nationalists obviously believe that identity will play a role in the decision that people will make. I don't think it will help them in the way that they think, because I don't think that Scots want to be made to feel that they're choosing between two deeply held and cherished identities that most Scots actually are perfectly comfortable having.
The Yes campaign have offered to publish their list of their donations at the same time as you do. Is that an offer you're going to take them up on?
Well, we have always said that we would publish the names of all of our donors in line with the Electoral Commission advice. We also said, I should say, that we would support what the Electoral Commission said before we saw it. We're glad that the Nationalists, once they saw that they agreed with the proposals, did did the same. But we've always said we will publish our proposals.
Why don't you
in the
tell
first,
me now? You can tell me now.
We always said we publish our proposals in the first quarter of this year. We will do it.
Why wait?
Raymond, you know from your own recent experience what happens when you criticise the Nationalists or speak out against the Nationalists. We have a duty of care to the people who've given to us. But look, before too long,
duty of care to the people of Scotland to let them know who's funding your campaign.
We've always said before too long we will publish the names of all of our donors, and people will be able to make a judgment. We've said we'll do it in the first quarter of this year, so you won't have to wait too long.
Okay, Blair McDougall, thank you very much indeed for joining us for this webcast. Blair McDougall of the Better Together campaign there in the second of these webcasts. And for more on the independence debate, including background analysis, latest developments in the story, go to the BBC Scotland News website and click on Scotland's Future. But from all of us here, thank you very much for joining us. Goodbye.